What's up guys, the Strong Boys 19 here. This is going to be a brand new list. This is going to be my list of my top 10 favourite albums of 2024. I actually did listen to quite a lot of albums. Normally I would have made the list as like a top 15 or top 20, but these are the top 10 that are my main favourites. My list is going to be not just through rock and metal. This list has a variety of different sounds. Some of you guys may agree with me on these, some of you may not, but at the end of the day, it is my personal opinion. And with that being said, let's dive into the list and let's start with the honourable mentions. The honourable mention albums of records that I think were great, awesome stuff, that didn't make it to the list are Nile, The Underworld Awaits Us All, Kendrick Lamar, GNX, High on Fire, Cometh the Storm, Knocked Loose, You Won't Go Before You're Supposed To, Nails, Every Bridge Burning, and the new Alcest album. Those albums, while they have been brilliant stuff, these are my definitive picks for the top 10 albums of the year. At number 10, I have Rosalie Cunningham, To Shoot Another Day. This is her third album in her brief discography. I did actually mention her previously on the album Two Piece Puzzle, which was one of my favourite albums of 2022. To Shoot Another Day, however, is a sign of a great improvement. Of course, her discography has been awesome from the start to the continuation of her career so far, but To Shoot Another Day is, in my opinion, as engaging, fun, and even more catchier than the previous album. Her material has been heavily inspired by the sounds through some psychedelia and that 60s, 70s rock stuff. And what I love a lot about this album is that almost all of the tracks on this album have been incredibly fun and as memorable. Her vocals are just spectacular. To follow the hooks and the overall sound of the music, the rest of the instrumentation sounded really good, having their own crispy and well-mixed chemistry of the separate tones, and the overall tracks are versatile and as dedicated as possible. So if you love these types of words, if you love psychedelia and 60s inspired music, then look no further than discover Rosalie Cunningham with her excellent album To Shoot Another Day. At number 9 is Opeth, The Last Will and Testament. This is a really strong concept album, heavily inspired by the World War I era, with these different characters, to make a concept that is not only really diverse and heavily progressive lyrically, but through the return of the band's sound in what they used to do before, in the heaviness of progressive death metal, but they still continued to deliver a lot of their big musical talent of experimenting through balance, melody, and beautiful arrangements. Michael Ackerfeld's vocals had been just as brilliant as ever, not just because of the growls, which was a nice idea to come back to, because it shows his adventurousness and the overall variety, but the rest of the band have made a concept as instrumentally that did perfectly blend the sounds through the intensity of these amazing riffs and precise solos and the other wonderful sounds of musicianship. The new drummer they've hired, by the way, did a wonderful job as well. I really think that The Last Will and Testament not only defines to feature some of the band's newer and strongest material yet, but it is such a big experiencing concept to digest. There's a lot through complexity as well as simplicity for vocal harmonies and performances, but with the clever balance through the direction of the material. Opeth definitely made an album that is always going to be known as one of their strongest to date. What is also a plus is that Jethro Tull's Ian Anderson did a lot of his own contribution, and as well as with the rest of the band, they have made a lot of amazing work to make this as a big, detailed concept album. Definitely one of those really interesting stories that has been nailed masterfully. At number 8 is Kamasi Washington, Fearless Movement. This is Kamasi's 4th studio album. I actually did discover his work when I bought the vinyl box set of his nearly 3-hour-long triple album, The Epic, which blew me away. I didn't expect to see and listen to another musician who I've been growing to love so much. Besides, he did go into his own contributions with other artists, Kendrick Lamar being an example, and also with other musicians in separate genres. But Fearless Movement is a brilliant, gorgeous album that's heavily focused around his experiences of fatherhood, and as well as with the instrumentation that perfectly matches the overall feeling and the emotion. There's the energy, there's the softness, and there's, as always, the strong, exciting improvisations. These long compositions don't feel dragged on, they don't feel forced. Basically, Fearless Movement is an album that is a focus on positivity and something as optimistic and uplifting as ever. The other additional musicians, with some surprises with these choruses to the harmonies, and as well as with a bit of rapping here and there, these other pieces have actually made this album so much more of an interesting product. It is a worthwhile listening album to digest. Awesome album, and what a great progression of what Kamasi had to offer. At number 7 is the debut studio album from Black Midi musician Jordy Griep, The New Sound. Black Midi were one of my favourite bands, but The New Sound just shows the continuation of Jordy's determination and big focus of creating music like this that is something like Black Midi, but this is like a different animal. I did not expect this album to come right in front of me with insanity, humour, and stellar musicianship to the overall tracks that are fun, energetic, memorable, catchy, and worth the addictive replay value. Jordy Griep, as well, made this album when he was 25. Like, holy shit, you did not expect this album to be released from a musician, from one of, in my opinion, the other incredible, strong bands to come from the UK. The New Sound is intensely descriptive, sarcastic, hilarious, and very uncommon through these time signatures to the rhythmic changes through a lot of this album's ongoing pacing. The lyrics are also really characteristic and just so funny and comedic. Besides that, Jordy himself expresses so much personality, and you can't go wrong with the album's closer being the Frank Sinatra song. And I would not think to myself that there would be another album that would go as manic, as schizophrenic, and as huge in its own character than this one. It's no surprise that this album would be the number 1 album of the year for many people, if not just one of the best albums this year had to offer. Jordy Griep had made an album that was just striking, pretty manic through the genres of avant-prog, Latin, and jazz rock / jazz fusion. All of these combinations into this over an hour long bunch of material. It's not for the faint of heart. So I would say if you want to check this out, do it with some caution. Or if you love experimental music with loads of words to describe, the New Sound will be the album for you. At number 6, this album was the biggest surprise of them all. I did listen to this album for the very first time and was completely mesmerized by how everything came to fruition in the whole attraction, from the look of the album to the overall material. Say what you say about some albums in the pop realm, but I will guarantee you guys that this is one that you should discover for yourselves. Number 6 is Magdalena Bay, Imaginal Disc. This is Magdalena Bay's second studio album, and there's no other pop album that I have discovered that's like this. Why aren't there a lot of pop albums in this sort of style? The two main genres through neo-psychedelia and synth-pop are beautifully blended through these sounds that have been ethereal, lush, beautiful, positive, joyful, and so many things around this album can be romantic and as full of expression, but it is just a gorgeous pop sounding album. This album was definitely a great involving one through the sounds of consistent songs that follow each other so perfectly, and the production is outstanding. Besides the ongoing direction through tracks that started things as quirky and passionately, as well as with the whole energy side of it, over time it does go into some sentimental and pretty philosophical directions lyrically, but Imaginal Disc is a stellar journey of an album. You would not expect me to talk about this album briefly in a list like this. I know that I don't have a lot of the interest to dive into a lot of the pop realm, but this album is just near perfection. A very strong album through these incredible influences that have been nailed and amazingly crafted, full of texture, chemistry, and as well as with the overall brilliance that is the whole ride of this album. Magdalena Bay's Imaginal Disc is my pick for pop album of the year. At number 5, this album is, personally for me, the number 1 pick for best metal album of the year. But like every list I do, it's on favoritism. But that does not mean that I would put this album in the lower ranking, because this is one of the top 5 favorite albums of the year, and it is as artistically massive and creatively diverse as ever, especially for the ongoing direction from this band. Number 5 is Blood Incantation, Absolute Elsewhere. This is their 4th album. It's a 2-track album that's 43 minutes in length, and I could not believe what I did listen to. Blood Incantation previously were writing material in the death metal world. I did buy the Time Wave Zero release, but that was like a space ambient driven affair of music. But I think at the same time that was a huge promising sign for the band to decide for themselves to be open-minded, go in this big exploration, be creatively free, and make an album that is beyond our wildest expectations. The album does have the elements through the intensity in their catchy, technical, rhythmic balance through the heaviness, but they explored through the tones of ambient, through the synthesizers that were beautifully mixed, and as well as with the elements of progressive rock from the 70s. It's just a wild, tripped out, and hugely diverse album, which does define at some of the best ideas that a metal band did create. And what is also really cool is that one of the members from the lineup of today of Tangerine Dream, Thorsten, did his synthesizer contributions on the second part from the Stargate. The Stargate and the Message are two long tracks that are worth your interest. If you love bands that decide to dive into loads of influences through the high approachments of music taste, then dive into Absolute Elsewhere from Blood Incantation, a near perfect, phenomenal album. At number 4 is Julia Holter with her new solo album, Something in the Room She Moves. This entirety of the album has been not only just beautiful and full of these combinations of genres through art pop, post-minimalism, chamber jazz, and ambient pop, but the album as a whole is loving, uplifting, and full of its own nature in such a calm, soothing, meditative, and heavily atmospheric presence. I actually didn't discover this musician at all, so I wanted to listen to her, and I was in awe by how strong this album is. It was always something amazing most of the time to listen to musicians who would go into their own world by finding these different ideas and to piece these things together to make something as ethereal and really intriguing for any fan who wants to get into something that's full of the texture and as well as with the whole soundscape and the massive space that it does have. Something in the Room She Moves by Julia Holter is an album that I have been growing to love more and more when I listen to it. I am so pleased that I am going to be a new fan of her work. At number 3 is from a band who have been at it for more than 50 years. And this album was not only just one of my most favourite albums of the year, but it is, to me, their best in a very long while. While the previous album was excellent and very, very good, this album took it to a whole other level. Number 3, Judas Priest, Invincible Shield. What can we say about Judas Priest that has not been said before? Rob Halford's vocals on this album, he still sounds as natural and as exciting and so awesome. His vocals have aged perfectly. I loved his ongoing presence through his own tone of mid-register to high vocals and occasional terrific harmonies. The lineup that has been active to this point, they were incredible. And also, the production is second to none because not only through these strong songs that I love a lot of this album to begin with, but the mixing and the production, especially through the drums and the guitar tone. Some of the other best ever, cleanest lead guitar tones for a heavy metal album that I have listened to. Invincible Shield by Judas Priest is outstanding. One of the other, I would say, in future years, definitive and top best Judas Priest albums across their very large discography in a very long time. Truly worth it, and they know how to keep the dedication of supporting the legacy and history of heavy metal, to keep that going as much as possible. Number 2 is an album that could have been my number 1, although it is my favourite rock album of the year, because of what it represented after more than 15 years from the release of the last album. I would have put this in at the top spot, but it is still worth it of a comeback. Another band that has been active for many decades have released an album that is punishing in its deepness, its moving and yet irresistible and emotional way. It's the album that made me cry. Number 2 is The Cure, Songs of a Lost World. Robert Smith and company have returned in a triumphant direction through originality of returning back to their beloved signature sound. And it was produced and mixed at Rockfield Studios in Wales. The sound of the album was immense. I really felt this album so much. The heavy lyrics around the inevitable loss, the passage of time, as well as with some of the occasional moments through the change of pace and the chemistry on some of the later tracks. But Robert Smith's lyrics have made me really teary-eyed, especially on the track And Nothing Is Forever. Fuck you. I love lots of this album. It's not just a Cure album, but it's an album from, like I said, a long ongoing band that is as fantastic, as phenomenal, and as just stunning. It's an album that is also mesmerizing through the emotions, that you really feel the heart and the soul and the overall experience of this. There's not a lot to really think about this album other than that this is truly an awarded album, and it was rightfully deserved to be the number 1 album in the UK. Now we go to number 1, my favourite album of the year. This is the debut album from a new, rising and accomplishing metal band who should be getting even more attention than before. I have talked about this band more than a few times on this channel, and I have addressed that you guys should discover this band and the album for yourselves. I knew it would be my number 1 pretty much after the moment I did review the album. As much as that 2024 had been an amazing year for loads of albums, but this is the one album that is, to me, one of my favourites from the decade so far, just like with some of the previous ones earlier. My number 1 album of 2024 is Heriot, Devoured by the Mouth of Hell, their brand new debut album released to Century Media Records. This is an album that does have a lot of mentality and chaos. The genres through the metalcore sounds to atmosphere and sludge metal. The band sounded to be like they wanted to be growing larger than before. It is heavy, hungry, pulverizing, and disgusting. The vocals, from the screams to the growls, were just torturous, demonic, and gruesome. The instrumentation is basically that in a nutshell. And what I love the most around the album is through the open-mindedness of the band's own creativity to search for different sounds of tonality to make this album as like a well-inspired and making it as their own distinctive sound as possible. I think I would make a prophetic comment that Heriot can continue to do material like this, but to maybe find some newer influences along the way. They have been making their reputation to become a really respecting band, and if you want to discover this band, go out and buy this album. They are doing an upcoming tour in the UK, and I am going to be seeing them. I will have to say that Devoured by the Mouth of Hell was always a beast, and a monstrous one at that. That is definitely one that I would put in as my favourite album of 2024. So that is it, guys. That is my list of my top 10 favourite albums of the year. Let me know what you guys think in the comments down below. Share your list as well. It can be just only rock or metal, or if you have a variety, please feel free to do so with what your picks are. What do you think of 2024 as a whole for new music? Thank you guys for watching, and I will keep you guys posted for more videos in the near future.